Even if you've heard only just the opening lines of the Christmas carol, you've heard about the wise men and their gifts. We three kings of Orient are, bearing gifts we traverse afar, field and fountain, moor and mountain, following yonder star. Kingly wise men from the east, bearing gifts, the gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Each of the three gifts was a valuable treasure, a gift fit for a king, and they presented them to the King of Kings, who at that time was still just a baby, being cared for by his young mother Mary and Joseph the carpenter, her husband. But what became of those gifts after that? Did they disappear like the mysterious Ark of the Covenant, hunted for in the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark? Were the gold, frankincense, and myrrh similarly lost, their whereabouts unknown for ages? What happened to the gold, frankincense, and myrrh? Well, what were those gifts anyway? Gold seems obvious. The Christmas carol has the first wise man sing, "Born a king on Bethlehem's plain, gold I bring to crown him again, king forever, ceasing never, over us all to reign." Yes, gold is a gift fit for a king. The traveler from the east likely brought with him a small treasure chest full of gold coins, like these coins minted by the Greek Empire and widely used in the Middle East at that time in history. The second wise man in the Christmas carol sings, "Frankincense to offer have I, incense owns a deity nigh, prayer and praising, voices raising, worshiping God on high." Frankincense is not only an incense used in worship to offer a sweet fragrance to God, frankincense is also a powerful medicine, relieving pain and inflammation. In today's over-the-counter herbal remedies market, frankincense is sold most often under the name Boswellia, the name of the plant that frankincense is extracted from. A recent study showed frankincense or Boswellia combined with curcumin is a more effective pain reliever than the expensive drug Celebrex. This medicinal herb was a valuable gift for the newborn King of Kings. The Christmas carol has the third wise man saying, "Myrrh is mine, its bitter perfume breathes a life of gathering gloom, sorrowing, sighing, bleeding, dying, sealed in the stone-cold tomb." The gift of myrrh may have been prophetic. Many see in these gifts to the baby a foreshadowing of the sufferings of Christ at the cross. Myrrh is also an aromatic material. It can be used as a pain-relieving drug, and Mark's Gospel tells us that the Roman soldiers offered myrrh to Jesus at his crucifixion, as they did to others facing the cross, to dull their pain, but the Lord refused to take it. Myrrh has also been used when embalming dead bodies, and John's Gospel tells us it was a part of the mixture that Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea carried with them to Jesus' tomb. So there's no doubt that the gold, frankincense, and myrrh were gifts of great value. But what happened to these treasures after they were delivered to the baby Jesus? In order to figure out the answer, we need to understand why these kings or wise men came to Bethlehem bearing gifts in the first place, and what happened next. The heavenly preparations for the first Christmas involved placing a special star in the sky, or a supernova or a comet, something that would have been called a star in those days, and putting it on the hearts of Babylonian astrologers in the East to interpret that star as a herald of a newborn king of the Jews. God laid it on the hearts of these astrologers or Magi to take some of their treasure and set out on a long journey to find that king. A number of Christmas carols set these events to music, but for factual information about what actually happened, we need to look at the Bible's Gospel of Matthew, where we read, After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." These men were pagans, practicing astrology, a form of divination. God's law to Israel through Moses strictly prohibited practicing magic and practicing divination. Divination includes things like astrology, horoscopes, and water witching and using divining rods to find water. So the Magi were not Jews. They were not following God's law. They were pagan wise men or magicians. While they were still back home in the east, they saw a star which they understood to mean that a new king of the Jews had been born. There are other cases also in the Bible where God actually intervened among pagans and caused their divination to produce a result that led them in the direction that God wanted. I'm thinking of Ezekiel chapter 21, where God forced the king of Babylon's divination to lead his armies against Jerusalem, and 1 Kings chapter 22, where Ahab's false prophets led him to destruction. In this case, God sent that star and gave these pagan astrologers understanding of what it meant. And he put it into their hearts to travel to the land of the Jews, to worship him or bow down to that new king. They wouldn't have traveled alone. They would have had a company of servants with them, carrying their treasures and their other supplies. It would have been an impressive sight when they showed up in Jerusalem. So the wise men did show up in Jerusalem asking, "Where is the one born King of the Jews?" The star did not lead them to Jerusalem. They said they only saw the star in the east, back home where they came from. But it was natural for them to go to Jerusalem because it was the Jewish capital, and that's where anyone would expect a Jewish king to be born. The whole city of Jerusalem was in an uproar over these visiting Magi. Of course, when the wise men from the east arrived, there already was a king of the Jews, and his name was Herod. Judea was a territory held and occupied by the Roman Empire. The Roman Caesar was the supreme ruler, but the Caesars allowed various local kings and governors to serve under them in local governments, and Herod was one of those local kings. So a newborn king who was not a child of his would be seen as a threat to his position. And that's what we read in Matthew chapter 2 as we continue there. When Herod heard of this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Herod knew, of course, that the Hebrew scriptures foretold a Messiah who would be a king born in David's royal line, not Herod's. So verse 4 continues, "And when he had assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. 'In Bethlehem in Judea,' they replied, 'for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel.'" That prophecy was from the Old Testament book of Micah. And as we continue, we read, "Then Herod called the Magi secretly and learned from them the exact time the star had appeared. And sending them to Bethlehem, he said, 'Go and search carefully for the child, and when you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him.'" Herod was lying, of course. He had no intention of bowing down to a baby who would replace him and his sons as rulers of the Jews. He wanted to find out exactly where the baby Jesus was so that he could kill him. So Herod sent the Magi off to locate the child for him. The account continues, "After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star that they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with great delight. Now, this is the part where the star actually moves, and the star actually leads the wise men. They had originally seen the star back home in the east, but now as they leave Jerusalem, the star appears again, and this time it actually moves and goes ahead of them. It leads them to Bethlehem and stops right above the place where Jesus was. Notice that this was some time after Jesus' birth, so the Magi did not arrive when the baby Jesus was still in the manger. He was now in a house, as we read in verse 11. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with the gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. So these visitors from the east bowed down before Jesus, and they presented the baby with the three gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The fact that there were three gifts has led people to conclude that there were three wise men, one gift from each man. But the stories that name three men and describe each of them are not actually found in the Bible. Scripture tells us simply that there were wise men from the east who brought these three gifts to the baby Jesus. Then verse 12 says, "And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they withdrew to their country by another route." So God again communicated with these visiting Gentiles and kept them from reporting to Herod the whereabouts of the baby Jesus. Right after that, God spoke again to Joseph through another dream. When the Magi had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said. "Take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." The Egyptian border at that time was only about 60 miles or so from Bethlehem. But in order to be safe from Herod's assassins, Joseph would need to take the family quite a way beyond the border, farther into Egypt. Verse 14 tells us, "So he got up, took the child and his mother by night, and withdrew to Egypt." Without a moment's hesitation, Joseph obeyed the angelic instructions. He woke Mary in the middle of the night, and they got up and fled together to Egypt with the baby that Herod wanted to kill. The account continues, "When Herod saw that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was filled with rage. Sending orders, he put to death all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, according to the time he had learned from the Magi." The hasty escape to Egypt saved baby Jesus from Herod's soldiers. But what would save him from death and starvation in that foreign land they had fled to? Egypt did not have any refugee resettlement program. A young family fleeing to Egypt in the middle of the night would not be greeted by social workers to find them housing and give them food stamps until Joseph could find a job. How would Joseph, Mary, and baby Jesus survive in that strange and hostile land where they didn't even speak the language? Again, God's early preparations for the first Christmas included making provision for the Holy Family's financial security. Mary and Joseph did not arrive in Egypt without any financial resources. God had provided for them the treasures of gold, frankincense, and myrrh that the wise men from the east had brought as gifts for the newborn Jesus. These valuables would be more than adequate to sustain the small family during their stay in Egypt. Those treasures were exactly what Joseph and Mary would need to buy food and shelter when they arrived in Egypt with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They could exchange the gold, frankincense, and myrrh for temporary housing and supplies, and perhaps even the tools that Joseph would need to set up a carpentry shop. So that solves the mystery of what happened to those treasures of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The wise men's gifts were put to practical use in providing for this young family that fled to Egypt as refugees. And those treasures remain valuable to us today because they're part of the message about Jesus, the Son of God who came to earth to save us from sin and death and to give us everlasting life. The gold, frankincense, and myrrh are just part of that message found in the Gospel according to Matthew. If you read the rest of Matthew's Gospel, you will find real lasting treasure that you will enjoy for the rest of your life and for eternity when this life is over. The Gospel message gives all of us treasure that is more valuable than gold, frankincense, and myrrh.